responsibilities, things like that. It's important when thinking about skills and digital preservation to have an idea of where you are as an organisation in terms of your digital preservation capability, and then also to be able to benchmark that and figure out where you are. And that's why the rapid assessment model is a really good tool for that, and will help you then understand what your skills needs are. And skills as well are a really important element of the rapid assessment model itself. It's one of the key things under the organisational viability section of DPC RAM, and includes requirements around people being in the correct roles for digital preservation, having clear responsibilities, having development opportunities, understanding what skills they need and how to develop them over time, and also building towards a certain level of expertise within your organisation. Eventually, if you were looking to reach the optimised level of RAM maturity, you would look to have a number of members of staff who might be considered experts in their field. So what types of skills are actually needed for digital preservation? It's really a multidisciplinary undertaking, and skills include anything from kind of management, project management, strategy development, risk management, through communications, the more technical side of information technology, and then legal and ethical issues, and into the more kind of digital preservation, archiving, records management, librarianship side of information management, and potentially more on top of that. So it really is bringing many different skills together, not just focused on digital preservation itself and technology. And that's why ultimately digital preservation also needs to be a collaborative endeavour. We're not necessarily thinking that everybody should be expert in all areas of these kind of skills and competencies, that people will have their own strengths and work together to bring all of the skills needed to do digital preservation. There are some barriers to developing skills for digital preservation though, and it's really useful to be aware of what those are. One of the problems I think that a lot of people face is that it's hard to define exactly what a digital preservation practitioner is. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, that it can be very context dependent, depending on where you are within your organisation, what work you're doing and how your team is formatted. And it does tend to be a kind of new and developing discipline. So we are beginning to see more description of what it means to be a digital preservation practitioner, but it hasn't, I don't think, fully emerged as an area of practice of its own, a profession of its own as yet. But we're slowly beginning to get there, and I think that's a good thing. One of the other barriers people often have to developing digital preservation skills is also a lack of organisational support. And that can be primarily in terms of not having the time available to develop their skills because they have so many other responsibilities, or a lack of funding available to be able to go to conferences or to undertake training courses. And it can be difficult to develop your digital preservation skills without that organisational support. Also, it can be hard to find courses or training opportunities to develop your digital preservation skills because of the fact that it is a new and developing discipline and practice, particularly in training that has practical hands-on options, because a lot of what we do is, again, very context dependent, so it can be hard to develop that training to make it practical because it won't necessarily be applicable for everybody. We also see that a lot of the training in digital preservation at the moment is at a more kind of beginner introductory level, and there aren't a lot of intermediate or advanced levels options out there, and that's something that we're hoping to develop more at the Digital Preservation Coalition. There are, however, some resources out there that can be really useful in developing your digital preservation skills. So some things that I wanted to highlight today, although this is by no means everything that's out there. First of all, there's been some great training content developed by the Australasia Preserves Group and has been made freely available on their website. So that includes some introductory level training, as well as training specifically on developing skills around automation for digital preservation. That's some really great material put together by very knowledgeable people within the Australasia Preserves Group. There's an organisation in the United States called the Digital Preservation Outreach and Education Group, which maintains a resource which lists different training opportunities that are available around the world. So if you're looking to undertake a training course, perhaps some online learning, then that can be a really useful place to go and find out what's available there. And they list courses from around the world, including things offered by the Society of American Archivists, a group called Library Juice, the International Council on Archives. So lots of different things that are available. There's also the DigiPres Commons site, which has lots of information about digital preservation, and in particular I would highlight the Copter resource that's available on there, which has lots of information about digital preservation tools for doing different parts of work. So if you want to start to develop your practical hands-on skills, it can be useful to have a look at what tools are available on Copter and start to try and use those. And then also the Open Preservation Foundation focuses particularly on the more technical aspects of digital preservation, and they have some really useful resources on their site, including a particularly great blog. And you'll also find that there's increasing numbers of resources being developed by professional organisations and a number of different master's courses at universities, many of them now also offering distance learning options for you to be able to undertake if you want to go the more formal route in terms of education. At the DPC, developing skills among our membership and the digital preservation community more broadly has long been one of our kind of key strategic goals. And if you're just getting started in digital preservation, I'd recommend 3 of our resources for you to have a look at. Our Digital Preservation Handbook, which looks to give a holistic view across all areas of digital preservation and point you out to lots of useful and interesting resources. We also have our Novice to Know-How training that we developed on behalf of the UK National Archives. And that is available as a free online learning to anybody that can sign up. There's a limited number of places per month, about 250, but at the moment we have lots of those available. So if you would like to do some beginners level training, now is the time to sign up for our Novice to Know-How course. The number of places available are going to be decreasing later in this year, so now it's a good time to sign up if you'd like to do it. And we also have lots of really interesting posts on our blog, particularly if you want to hear about what people are doing at their organisations in terms of digital preservation. There's lots of case studies on there about what our members are doing. Once you start to make progress and develop your skills a bit further, lots of things available, more things available on the DPC website, including the rapid assessment model that I mentioned already, so help you to understand your digital preservation capabilities at your organisation. We have technology watch reports and guidance notes which delve into particular aspects of digital preservation work. And we have a number of toolkits to help you forward what you're doing around procurement, developing policy, preserving EDRMS systems, and developing business cases. And we also have a number of tools to help you work on advocacy as well. Our executive guide for explaining why digital preservation is important to executives, our bit list around vulnerable formats, and also our World Digital Preservation Day, which is coming up at the beginning of November this year. All of these resources are available on the DPC website, and there are a number of other supporting things that you can get if you join the DPC, including kind of free access to our events that we hold, as well as access to our grant scheme, which allows you to gain grants to undertake development opportunities. So please do visit our website to find out about the resources we have available. For the rest of the presentation today, Amy and I are going to be focusing on our new competency framework, and we hope this will be a really important resource for people to help them understand what skills are required for digital preservation and to help them start to develop those in a structured way. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction, and then Amy's going to go into a little bit more detail. So, why did we decide to develop a new framework? Well, practitioners, particularly among the DPC membership, told us that they needed help with identifying where they had skills gaps, either individually or within their organisation, to help them then to structure their professional development, to prioritise what skills they needed to develop moving forwards, to also help them make the case to increase the team for digital preservation at their organisation, to develop role descriptions so they could understand what each member of staff should be doing within their organisation, and then also to help them with recruitment. What skills did the new members of staff need to have? And there has been some excellent work on digital preservation skills in the past, but it has largely focused on developing curricula for master's courses and training, rather than looking on a more practical focus at the skills needed for people who are working in the field. And some of the resources that are out there as well have been developed based on relatively small samples of data, small kind of cohorts of individuals, rather than bringing together a wider group of resources. And that's something that we've really tried to do in developing the new framework, to look at all the lessons learned from previous work in this area, but also really focus on best practice standards, or good practice standards rather, for digital preservation, and how we can bring those together to develop a view of what skills we need. And so in terms of developing the new framework, our key aims that we had were making sure that it was flexible enough to deploy for a variety of different purposes, so all of those mentioned on the previous slide, as well as making sure that it was closely linked to our rapid assessment model that we already mentioned. So we know that the skills that we've included within the framework are those that will help you to build your digital preservation capacity and capabilities over time. And as I said, we went through quite a comprehensive research phase, doing a literature review of previous work, looking at key good practice standards, and also data that we gather at the Digital Preservation Coalition around workforce requirements, around looking at training, as well as kind of labour market analysis. And Amy and I undertook quite significant gap analysis at that point, which included lots of post-it notes on the wall to make sure that we identified the kind of important key elements of the good practice standards, the existing resources, and to identify any gaps that there might be. In terms of development, our progress to date, we have completed a beta version of the Competency Framework, which is out now on preview for DPC members. And alongside that, we also have developed a Competency Audit Toolkit, which was supported by the UK's Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. So that's actually a practical toolkit to allow you to audit your skills at an individual level and an organisational level in terms of digital preservation. Hopefully that'll allow people to actually implement the framework in that more practical way that was missing from previous resources. And we've also created a grouping of 8 example role descriptions to give people an idea of how you might build a role for digital preservation and what level of skills you might need. We also have in progress a pilot of that audit toolkit. A number of organisations around the world, including the National Library Board of Singapore, are piloting the Competency Audit Toolkit for us to see if it meets all requirements and if it's useful, and then we'll make updates on the toolkits based on the feedback we receive before we have the full public release of the Competency Framework and the Audit Toolkit in October this year. And there will be more to come as well. We'll be continuing to expand our supporting resources to help with recruitment for digital preservation, to give guidance on how to develop skills, including more information on resources that are out there and training that's available. And also we're doing another round of our labour market analysis this year, looking at the job market for digital preservation. And hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, we'll also be developing more online training to start taking people to that intermediate or advanced level of digital preservation in a way that will complement our beginner's level novice to know-how course. So just to quickly introduce the Competency Framework itself before I hand over to Amy to talk about it in more detail. The aim of it is really to provide information on the skills, knowledge and competencies required for successful digital preservation. So it gives you the full picture of what's required. And as mentioned earlier, the core principles of the Competency Framework are that it be flexible, able to be deployed for a variety of purposes, and that it's closely linked to that rapid assessment model from the DPC. And it also aims to be applicable for organisations of any size or in any sector, so not for any particular type of organisation, to support a range of workforce development activities like those that I've mentioned, to be preservation strategy and solution agnostic, so it doesn't require you to be implementing a particular preservation solution for you to be able to use the competency framework. That it's based on existing good practice, and also it's hopefully simple to understand and quick to apply. And now I'm going to pass over to Amy for a bit more detail. She's going to take us through the framework itself and give a bit of an introduction to the Audit Toolkit too.
So I'll go ahead and quickly switch over to my slides. Great, so thanks, Sharon. And as Sharon mentioned, we have a new resource coming soon for public release in October 2022. And that is our Dpc Digital Preservation Competency Framework, which will provide information on the skills, knowledge, and competencies required for successful digital preservation. And as mentioned, we had flexibility in mind. We want it to be used across different contexts and have enough detail where it can be understandable, but also, again, widely applicable across different digital preservation contexts. It was important for us because terms mean different things, especially when it comes to ideas like competencies and skills. So before I get into it, I wanted to give a quick explanation of the terms, how we use them. So digital preservation, this is the definition used by the DPC, which is a series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. And in essence, this is about digital preservation being more than one thing. Sharon's talked about the importance of skills of staff. So it's not just technology, but it's also resources and people and support. So competency, we define it as a combination of skills, knowledge, and behaviors that, when they're combined, allow an individual to perform their duties of their role. And then skill has a more narrow definition. We're talking about a specific ability that you can apply to complete a particular task or reach a certain outcome. So you can know about something and have knowledge, but the skill is that ability to apply that knowledge successfully for a task or outcome. And basically, in short, what we're talking about is reaching a competency in a particular area. You achieve this through gaining and being able to apply related skills and knowledge. So an overview of the competency framework, we wanted to have a broad kind of higher level view of it. So after all the post-it notes and preliminary research, we ended up with 5 high-level competency areas. And these give an overview and quick reference to those broad range of competencies required for digital preservation work. And these go across disciplines as well. Within those, we have the 27 skill elements. So these are those more specific skill areas, and those are organized in groups under those larger competency areas. And it breaks them down more into more clearly defined units. And this is what it looks like in a nutshell. So these are the competency areas and skill elements for the framework. As you can see here, there's the 5 high-level ones to the left, representing a broad range of interdisciplinary knowledge areas and skills. And as you can also see, only one of these directly has digital preservation in its name. But again, all of these things are essential for having successful digital preservation. So it's also important to have skills relating to having a sustainable organizational infrastructure, to communications and advocacy, to information and technology skills, and to proactive management of legal and social considerations. All of these are essential. And additionally, in these skill elements that we identified, there is, of course, overlap within. Some of them might apply to one or more of the competency areas, but we decided to present them in this way with those that we felt were most closely aligned. And so again, to reiterate, we don't expect any digital practitioner to have all of these skills in all of these areas. It's a collaborative effort, and different roles will require different skill levels and strengths within these. So to actually help think about skill levels and how to improve them, we have 5 skill levels, which represent a progression of the knowledge and skills. And these are illustrated here. Sharon did these cat illustrations to show the progression of skills. And within those skill levels in the framework, we have examples of activity descriptors. So the purpose is to clarify what we mean by them and also communicate how these might be described in a job or role description. And these are presented here. So you can see the 5 skill levels, a short description, and then the example activity descriptor words or are how they might be used in a job or role description at that level. Again, it's not prescriptive. There might be variation, but this is what we've generally found to show the progress between being aware of something to being able to apply it and have expertise and knowledge at a more expert level. So the idea of detail, giving a quick summary, but really it was important for us to have this quick overview, but then also allow additional tables to help refine and communicate what we meant. So we have additional tables within the framework to give more detail if needed. And these include things like example statements to help clarify the skill elements and how they might be presented in the description, and then actual activities to show the tasks where it might be deployed and applied in practice. We have the word might here written twice, might be presented and might be deployed. And this relates to the philosophy that there won't be one solution. There will be no one size fits all for preservation in your context. So again, not meant to have everything. It's about really looking at what you need within the organization and what is feasible. So fostering what we call good practice rather than best practice. And here is an example here. So this is the first competency area for governance, resourcing, and management. And as you can see, this relates to sustainable digital infrastructure. There are some skill elements here that might be required of a role having to do with more policy focused. We don't expect it to be a checklist to go through, but suggestions to think about and apply. And in essence, what this is getting at is having a clear understanding of the organizational and context and the organizational priorities and how to align digital preservation context and priorities with the organization at the higher level. So some ideas about what you might actually use the framework for. There is that benchmarking element. So it's be able to look through it, see what skills you have, which ones you would like to improve on, do a gap analysis at both an individual level or have a group of individuals and organization do this and kind of get a larger view for an organizational audit. Planning professional development. Once you identify gaps, you'll have an idea of how you might be able to use identify how to look for training or courses or development to fill those gaps. So it's a tool in that way and that it can provide evidence to make an argument for further support. Again, it can help with job descriptions or role descriptions for a current or a new role. And then and also evaluating curricula. So as Sharon mentioned, a lot of this has been built on work relating to digital preservation skills in the context of curricula, but we also want it to be something where you can look at it and use it to help train and educate practitioners. So with time, I'll be a little conscious of time, so I'll quickly go through this. So DPC members do have an early look at the competency framework and our new DPC CAT Audit Toolkit, and we'll release this in October 2022. So I won't get into too much of the details of how it's actually applied, but talk about more about what it is and how it might be of use. So this was designed as a companion to the framework. It gives that practical structured process for assessing competencies. And the DPC CAT toolkit has 3 things. It has a guidance document to tell you about it and how you might get started. It's got a workbook for individual audits. So this is to help do those individual assessments or job description assessments. And then there's also a workbook for larger organizational audits. So if you wanted to undertake an audit of skills for staff across an organization. The reasons for using it are similar to the reasons you'd want to use a framework, but the CAT provides a more practical and methodological approach. So it gives processes and guidance to steps to take to undertake an audit of an individual's skills and planning, to look at the role descriptions and assess them in a strategic way, and also to do an audit of the skills across the organization, which link to the DPC RAM levels of maturity that have been established. Right now, I'll quickly explain how it can be used in these 3 ways, and there'll be more to come. But the first is that individual skills audit. So in that workbook, there's going to be a worksheet to assess skill levels against those in the framework. You'll be able to go through the list, identify key areas for development, and have support to provide evidence of need. This is a short screenshot of that sheet, but in essence, you'll be able to look through each of those, decide whether they're relevant, assess your current skill level, and then optionally decide where do you want to be to reach a higher level, and have some notes here, for instance, for policy development to perhaps assist a digital archivist with forthcoming policy review as a means to get that higher level. The second one is that role description. So this is going to be to compare a role description with actual tasks and responsibilities. And this is really helpful for if you have a current position to compare what is written in the description versus what you actually do, and have evidence for redrafting more compensation, promotion, or even making the case for having a new job role and description. Similar, here's a screenshot of that, which shows there's each of those elements. You can write down your actual tasks and responsibilities. You can compare it to the text of a role description, and then you can determine whether an update is required and any further actions. And then the third type is organizational audit. And this involves a few steps, but in essence, it's about looking at those individual and description assessments and bringing them together to look at a wider view and larger picture at the organization. So what you will do is you'll benchmark competencies against current and target digital preservation capabilities. And this is where RAM comes in, because you will have already done this assessment. And this will allow you to look at the skill levels and then calculate the highest skill level for staff, as well as the average, to kind of look at where gaps exist. This section about before considering is in our guidance, but it really is before you do the audit. We have this to think about how you will use it, and this will help shape the benefits of undertaking the CAT audit. And to give a quick summary of those main steps that you will do to do an organizational audit. First, you'll plug in your RAM scores. As mentioned, there'll be a sheet in there where you'll plug in what your RAM assessment levels were and where you want to be. Next, you will have a worksheet where, similar to the individual one, there'll be columns where you'll be able to put each individual's scores. And then from that, you will be able to go to another sheet, which will go ahead and aggregate all of those data entered to tell you a kind of larger picture of where you're at based on it. So this is a lot of information, but in essence, what it does is it will show where you are in RAM, where you want to be, what level of skills you'll need in order to reach that level of RAM. And then you'll be able to look at things like how, and the color coding, see how much improvement or where you're met. So there's green if there's no gap, and then it goes up to red. In essence, this will give a nice snapshot of where you're at, and you can use this data for whatever means necessary, whether it's developing a new role or just advocating for more resources for preservation. So we'll have this available. If you're a DPC member, you'll have access to it now, an early version. We're having the pilots go on, so that will help improve and refine it before we have that public release, which will be available to everyone in October 2022. And then more information is on our website. And then finally, this is kind of adjacent, but Sharon had mentioned Australasia Preserves as a wonderful opportunity to meet others in your region who are working on digital preservation. And there is an event coming up in August, which will focus on frameworks. So there will be some overlap going on there, and we encourage you to join. And if you have any questions, we have our new head of Australasia and Asia Pacific, Robin Wright, who we can get you in touch with that. But that is the DPC Competency Framework and CAT in a nutshell. And there's more information coming soon. And do let me or Sharon know if you have any questions about the framework.
Okay, thank you, Amy and Sharon. Yeah, I mean, so let me see. We now have some time for a Q&A session. If anybody has any questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A sort of like little chat box, little tab, and we will see if we can address them. I had a question myself. So many of the competencies you've talked about are competencies that may need to be developed on the job. And it may be that we are hiring people to digital preservation positions who are new to the job market or who may have experience in totally different fields. So what should we be looking for in such people to recognize potential? How can we apply the framework to that?
Yeah, so I think if you're hiring new people and you're not expecting them to necessarily have any particularly strength in digital preservation, then I would be looking at some of the other areas then of the skills framework to look for them to have skills. So particularly things around general IT skills, communication skills, project management perhaps, those kind of more generic skills that you could kind of ask them about and establish. I took part in a panel a number of years ago on digital preservation skills at the UK's Archives and Records Administration Association conference, and there were a number of kind of senior people from archives and libraries in the UK there, and it was interesting to hear the discussion there about when they're hiring staff for digital preservation roles, what they're looking for more than anything are people who are willing to learn and who are flexible and who can develop new skills. So it wasn't necessarily, as you kind of mentioned there, Kevin, looking for people with specific digital preservation capabilities. It was about that keenness to actually develop and the ability to learn and to kind of grow with the job that they're given. So yeah, I would be focusing on that kind of area. So people who can work as part of a team, people who can communicate well, people who are keen to learn and have shown kind of competency at that, rather than necessarily specific digital preservation skills, because there are resources then out there like the Our Novice to Know-How course that can teach them the basics of digital preservation, but being able to collaborate and communicate is perhaps the most important part of digital preservation.
Yeah, I was going to echo that as well. I think they're called the soft skills and sometimes, but that really, I think it was important for us to have that communication advocacy as a competency area, because that's something that translates to successful work across tasks in digital preservation. And that's something that I personally found surprising when I entered the digital preservation field. So.
We have two questions which are related. So I might have missed it, but is there a learning roadmap that comes with the competency framework to guide the development of preservation specialists? And also, does the DPC have plans to develop additional training resources / programs to complement the framework? So there's a novice to know-how course. Would there be anything past that?
Yeah. So we don't have a kind of training or development roadmap as yet, but that is one of the future resources that we're planning to build in the next kind of year or so to complement it. At the moment, if you're looking for training in specific areas, I would, or kind of development resources, I'd recommend looking at some of those things that I've mentioned in my presentation around both on our website as well as the DPOE's training listing and the resources that are available through things like DigiPress Commons. Sorry, the slides are going to be made available. We've sent a copy of those over to Kevin and Belinda already, so they'll be able to send them out, and you'll be able to get the links that are included in the slides from those. In terms of training from the DPC, the answer is a big yes. We're definitely planning to develop more training to help people move on from their kind of beginner level. We have, I think, 4 or 5 training courses in kind of the plans for developing within the next calendar year. We're going to be looking at risk management for digital preservation. We're going to be doing something on web archiving. We're going to look at building capacity and planning and strategy, particularly around to complement a rapid assessment model. We're looking at one on kind of basic IT skills and knowledge for archivists and librarians. I can't remember what the other one is. I'm not sure if Amy will be able to remember off the top of the head, but that's the kind of things we're planning to do. And we're hoping that that will be a continuing programme of new training development. It will be driven primarily by what the DPC members tell us they need, and so that will be how we prioritise the courses that we develop. So if you want to help decide what training courses we develop, then join up to the DPC. But yes, we're hoping eventually to have quite a substantial catalogue of training for digital preservation.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Feel free to enter them in the chat, in the chat or into the Q&A tab. Well, there's a question here about how many years one would need to become competent in digital preservation.
I think that's one of those how long is a piece of string questions, to use that idiom. It's very dependent on the context you're working on, what your role is, and how, again, as I mentioned, in terms of barriers, how much support you get from your organisation. I think you can become basically competent in digital preservation relatively quickly, particularly if you work your way through, again, as I mentioned, our novice know-how course. That's going to give you some really great kind of starter, a good foundation of digital preservation. But I think if you want to become quite advanced in digital preservation, to really build up a substantial kind of skills, we're talking maybe like 3 to 5 years to become particularly competent in the area, kind of at a minimum. Yeah, Amy, I don't know if you want to, you're newer to the field than I am.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it depends on you're asking. I guess it depends also on imposter syndrome, but you are usually more competent than you think after a couple of years. But also with that, you're competent, and then it's not a static thing either. So it's something you're just going to always becoming more competent as technology changes and the skill set changes. So that is a draw for me in the field, is that you are always learning and you're always going to be developing your skill set. So there'll never be kind of a static moment where you're like fully competent, because inevitably things will develop.
Yeah, and I would say as well that while we define in the skills framework everything from a novice to an expert, I never expect anybody to try to aim to be expert at all kind of elements of kind of digital preservation and the required competencies and skills. I think that you might become you might be able to, over the course of your career, become an expert in certain areas of digital preservation, but I've yet to meet, in 16 years of working in this field, anybody who I would say is an expert at everything in digital preservation.
Right, we just had a couple of interesting questions come in. So the first one is, are you aware of any internship or attachment programs to other institutions as part of progression to the next level of competency for digital preservation?
think of any that come to mind at the moment. There are some organisations that run internship schemes. I know ones that have happened in the past. The UK National Archives was running a kind of internship scheme called Bridging the Digital Gap, and bringing people into digital preservation skills. And I believe the University of Oxford here in the UK used to take on some kind of people on an internship basis, but there aren't any particularly on an international level, programs that I know of. They do tend to be kind of organisation specific rather than run by any kind of broader organisation. So we have found that for most people, it's either they'll begin to learn their skills either while they're already holding an information management job of perhaps a more traditional nature, or they'll start to learn their skills as part of a master's course in archiving or librarianship.
Okay, I think we might have enough time for maybe one or two more questions. There's one here. I am from an archive with a dozen archivists, mostly with backgrounds of history and public administration. We are not staying in the same post forever, but we get posted around, so we move to different areas of archives administration, appraisal, reference, so on. So what would you suggest we do with a workforce like this? Should we recruit more staff with IT backgrounds? Should we provide more training to existing archivists, regardless of their posts and so on? And I had a similar question because there are lots of organizations which may have only one person performing multiple digital preservation functions, or even a single person doing digital preservation and non-digital preservation functions. So how can your framework help such organizations?
Yeah, so I think that's where the Audit Toolkit comes in. It will allow you to start to understand what current skills that you have at the organisation and where the gaps it might be. For most people, particularly if you have teams like that, it's going to be potentially a combination of developing skills amongst your current staff and then potentially hiring new staff. So that's part of why it's important to kind of undergo that audit phase. You'll find out where there might be any gaps within your current skills. If it's a particularly large gap and a particular grouping of skills, then that might be where you think, well, maybe we'll hire somebody to fulfill this role. So if you find that you have quite a gap around kind of the more technical area, then that might be something kind of allow you to make the case for hiring somebody with those technical skills. And it's again another reason why we have in the toolkit, the organisational audit toolkit, you get to see what the highest level of skill amongst your staff is, as well as the average. So you might be able to see that, well, we have somebody who's really strong in this area, but it's just one person, whereas overall our average is kind of lower for this particular skill. And that's where you might then look to upskill all of your members of staff. And again, particularly if you have a large kind of grouping of staff who are kind of new to digital preservation, that's where, again, I would kind of sell you on the idea of taking on our Novice to Know-How course, because it does provide that really good foundation of knowledge that it provides a kind of common kind of language as well for talking about digital preservation across the team. And like I said, we've got plenty of spaces available on that at the moment, probably for the next kind of 5 to 6 months. But you should be able to quite easily get a space on that course. And we found that a lot of organisations have really found it helpful to put a number of members of staff through it at the same time, so they can discuss their learning and start to understand how that can be applied at the organisation. So they'll perhaps all be doing the online course, but they'll have kind of regular meetups where they'll discuss what learning they've been doing and how that applies to their organisation.
All right. Okay. I think we might be running out of time, so we have a few more questions. But I'm really sorry. We would like to get through them, but I think we might have to call it there. So thank you again to Sharon and Amy for sharing with us on Dpc's competency framework and for your competency audit toolkit. As a digital preservation practitioner myself, sometimes it feels like I'm not so much being nurtured as being forged by a fire that I've been tossed into. And I think having a framework like this really helps me understand and approach my development a bit more intentionally. And I'm sure others feel the same.